The Grand Hall of the Galactic Council fell silent. 300 alien leaders sat in curved rows, their many eyes fixed on the central display. The images showed burning worlds and fleeing ships. Elder Tivlar, a tall blue being with 4 arms, pointed at the screen with a trembling finger. "This is the 8th colony lost this month," Tivlar said. His voice echoed in the quiet room. "The Void Scourge grows stronger. Our weapons cannot stop them. Our ships cannot outrun them." The council members shifted in their seats. Fear filled the air like a thick fog. These beings had known peace for 1,000 years. Their bodies were soft, their muscles weak. They had forgotten how to fight. "We have tried everything," said Councillor Mavo, her pink skin paling. "Our best soldiers fall before they can even fire a shot. The Void Scourge will reach the core worlds in less than a year." Elder Tivlar took a deep breath. What he would say next might change the galaxy forever. "There is one option we have not tried," he said slowly. "The beings from Sol 3. Gasps filled the room. Some council members stood up in protest. Sol 3 was a forbidden name, a world so dangerous it was kept under strict quarantine. The Deathworlders. Councillor Drelvac hissed, her scales flaring with anger. "Have you lost your mind, Elder? Those creatures are savages." Tivlar held up his hands for quiet. "I know what the records say. Sol 3, Earth, as they call it, is a Class 12 death world. Extreme gravity, deadly radiation, aggressive life forms, and natural disasters that would kill any of us in minutes." He tapped a control, and the screen changed to show a new image, a planet of blue oceans and green lands, wrapped in swirling white clouds. It looked peaceful from space. It was not. The humans who evolved there are built for survival in ways we can barely understand. Tivlar continued. "Their bones are dense as stone. Their muscles generate forces that would tear our bodies apart. They can survive injuries that would kill any of us. And most terrifying of all, they evolved as predators." The council chamber erupted in fearful chatter. Predator species were rare in the galaxy and usually died out before achieving space travel. The idea of asking such beings for help seemed insane. "We discovered them 50 years ago," Tivlar reminded them. "We decided to quarantine their system because we feared them. But now, I wonder if that fear might save us all." For 3 days, the council debated. For 3 days, more colonies fell to the Void Scourge. Finally, with heavy hearts, they voted. They would contact Earth. The human delegation would arrive at Galactic Central Station in 6 hours. The greeting committee waited nervously by the docking bay. None of them had ever seen a human in person before. "Are the safety measures in place?" asked Station Director Pelvox, checking the security screens for the 10th time. "Yes, Director," replied Security Chief Zim. "Gravity is set to Earth normal in their quarters. Air composition is adjusted to their needs. The containment fields can be activated in 3 seconds if there's an incident." Pelvox nodded, but her 6 eyes blinked rapidly, a sign of extreme stress. "Remember, do not make any sudden movements. Do not show your teeth. Do not touch them. Their strength could crush your bones by accident." The station's warning lights flashed as the human ship docked. It was small and plain compared to the elegant council vessels, built for function rather than beauty. The airlock cycled, and the door slid open. The first human stepped out, and the greeting committee froze in surprise. He was smaller than they expected. His body was covered in a simple dark suit. He had only 2 arms, 2 legs, and a single head with 2 forward-facing eyes, the mark of a predator species. But his movements were slow and careful. His face formed what the briefing had called a smile, a gesture meant to show friendliness, not aggression. "Greetings," he said in perfect council standard. "I am Kim Jun, Ambassador of Earth. I bring peaceful greetings from humanity." Pelvox stepped forward, trying to hide her fear. "Welcome to Galactic Central Station, Ambassador Kim. I am Director Pelvox. We thank you for answering our call." Kim Jun bowed slightly. When we received your message describing the threat, our leaders felt we could not ignore it. We understand that our worlds have been separate for many years, but some dangers require us to work together. As they walked from the docking bay, the station staff kept a careful distance from the human. They had been warned about human strength, human speed, human endurance. This quiet figure seemed harmless, but appearances could be deceiving. In the main conference room, Elder Tivlar waited with the emergency council. When Ambassador Kim entered, Tivlar studied him with all four eyes. This was the first time any council elder had met a human face to face. Ambassador, Tivlar said, "We appreciate your quick response to our message. I know this is unusual after 50 years of quarantine." Kim Jun nodded. "The quarantine was your choice, Elder Tivlar. We have always been ready for peaceful contact." Tivlar gestured to the large screen on the wall. "I must show you why we have broken our own rules today." The screen lit up with images of destruction, planets burning, cities in ruins, strange dark ships tearing through defense fleets like they were made of paper. The Void Scourge attacked without warning and without mercy. "They appeared 6 months ago from the galaxy's edge," Tivlar explained. "They do not communicate. They do not take prisoners. They simply destroy. Our weapons barely damage them. Our bodies are not built for war." Kim Jun watched the footage with a calm face, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "You need soldiers," he said simply. "We need help," Tivlar corrected. "We need beings who can fight in ways we cannot." Kim Jun was quiet for a long moment. "I will need to consult with my government. But first, I would like permission to bring a small team of military advisors to assess the situation. They can determine how humans might help." The council members looked at each other nervously. More humans? Military humans. These advisors asked Councillor Drelvac, would they be armed? "No," Kim assured them. "They would simply observe and plan. But I must be honest with you. If we decide to help, actual combat forces would need their weapons." After a tense debate, the council agreed. 3 days later, a second human ship docked at the station. Colonel Li Hyun stepped out first. He was taller than Ambassador Kim, with broad shoulders and alert eyes that scanned everything. Behind him came 3 specialists. Park Ji, a combat engineer with quick hands and a thoughtful face. Han Sun, an exobiologist who immediately began studying the alien welcome party. And Choi Min, a tactical officer who moved with the smooth grace of a trained fighter. The station security team watched these newcomers with even more fear than they had shown Ambassador Kim. These humans did not look like diplomats. They looked dangerous. "Colonel Lee," Tivlar greeted them. "Welcome to Galactic Central." "Thank you for having us," Lee replied with a slight bow. "Ambassador Kim has briefed us on the situation. We're here to help however we can." Tivlar led them to the command center, where the latest reports from the front lines waited. As Lee and his team reviewed the tactical displays, their faces grew serious. "Your defense strategies are..." Lee paused, looking for a polite word. "Not aggressive enough. You form lines and wait for the enemy to come to you. That is how wars were fought in the ancient times," explained the Council's chief of defense, a tall green being named Ulvok. "Before we found peace." Lee nodded. "I understand. But this enemy doesn't play by those rules." For hours, the humans studied the Void Scourge's attack patterns. They asked questions that had never occurred to the Council strategists. They suggested weapons modifications that sounded barbaric but logical. During a demonstration of Council combat training, Choi Min stepped forward. "May I show an alternative approach?" he asked. The Council trainers nodded, curious. Choi moved through a series of lightning-fast strikes that left the aliens gasping. His power and speed seemed impossible. "This is how humans fight," Ambassador Kim explained. "We evolved on a world where everything tried to kill us. Our bodies and minds are built for survival." As if to prove his point, an emergency alert blared through the station. A nearby outpost was under attack. The Void Scourge had broken through another defense line. "We're sending all available ships," Ulvok said, his color fading with worry. Colonel Lee stepped forward. "Let us join them." The council members looked at each other in surprise. "You want to fight?" asked Tivlar. "We want to help," Lee said firmly. "And sometimes, helping means fighting. This is your first chance to see what humans can truly do." After a quick conference, the council agreed. As the human team prepared to board a fast transport to the battle, Ambassador Kim approached Colonel Lee. "Remember," Kim said quietly, "we're not just fighting the Void Scourge today. We're fighting 50 years of fear. Show them what humanity stands for." Lee nodded, his face determined. "We will. Humans protect those who cannot protect themselves. That's what we do." As their ship launched toward the distant battle, the council watched with a mixture of hope and dread. They had called for help from the Deathworlders. Now they would see what that truly meant. The transport ship carrying Colonel Lee Hyun and his team raced through space toward Outpost Zeta 9. Through the viewports, they could see flashes of light in the distance. Weapons fire. The battle had already begun. "Status report," Lee demanded as they approached. The alien pilot, a thin being named Kiv, checked his screens with trembling hands. "Not good, Colonel. The outpost shields are at 30%. Council peacekeeping ships are being destroyed faster than they can retreat." Lee turned to his team. Their faces were calm but focused. They had trained for moments like this. "Park Ji, you'll focus on defense systems. Find ways to strengthen them," Lee ordered. "Han Sun, I need you to study the Scourge up close. Find any weakness. Choi Min, you're with me on the front line." The transport rocked violently as it passed through the battle zone. Outside, dark ships with glowing red lines swarmed around the outpost like angry insects. These were the Void Scourge attack vessels. They moved faster than council ships and hit much harder. "Brace for landing," shouted Kiv. The transport shuddered as it landed in the outpost's emergency bay. The doors opened to chaos. Injured aliens rushed past them, their different-colored blood staining the floor. Alarms blared. The lights flickered as another explosion shook the station. An outpost officer hurried over, his 4 eyes wide with panic. "Who are you?" "We were told to expect help, but—" "We're the help," Lee said simply. "Where is your command center?" The command center was in shambles. The outpost commander, a tall purple alien named Neverin, looked up in surprise when the humans entered. "Humans?" "The council sent humans." She sounded both shocked and desperate. "We expected more ships, more soldiers." "You got us instead," Lee said. "What's the situation?" Neverin pointed to the tactical display. "The Scourge broke through our outer defenses an hour ago. We've lost 20 ships. They'll breach the main shields in minutes. We have 300 civilians in the central chambers with nowhere to run." Lee studied the display for just 10 seconds, then began giving orders. "Redirect all power from the east side to strengthen the west shields," he told the operators. "The Scourge are concentrating their attack there." "But that would leave the east side defenseless," protested one of the officers. "They expect you to defend evenly." "Don't," Lee explained. "Park Ji, go to the east side. Set up a trap." Park Ji nodded and left quickly, carrying her equipment pack. "Han Sun, I need a visual on the Scourge ships," Lee continued. "Every detail matters." The screens changed to show close-up images of the attacking vessels. Han Sun leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied their structure. "There," he said, pointing to a spot where the red energy lines connected. "That junction point glows brighter when they fire. It might be a weakness." Lee nodded. "Send that data to all remaining defense ships. Choi Min, you're with me. We need to organize the ground defense." As the humans moved into action, the alien staff watched in amazement. These creatures from a death world moved with purpose and confidence even as the station shook around them. On the east side of the station, Park Ji worked quickly, Council engineers watched in confusion as she dismantled parts of their defense systems. "What are you doing?" one of them asked. "Those are our only remaining weapons here." "Building something better," Park Ji replied without looking up. Her hands moved with practiced skill, connecting wires and rearranging components. "Your weapons fire directly. The Scourge expect that. We need to surprise them." She pointed to the ceiling panels. "Help me place these modified emitters up there, and here along the walls. When the Scourge break through, they won't see our trap until it's too late." The engineers looked doubtful, but followed her instructions. None of them would have thought to hide weapons or change their firing patterns. Their species had evolved as peaceful herbivores. Direct confrontation was their only concept of conflict. In the command center, Han Sun had taken over a research terminal. The screens displayed dissections of Scourge debris recovered from previous battles. "These aren't just ships," he muttered. "They're partly organic. Look at these tissue samples." Neverin peered at the screen. "We noticed the organic components, but we couldn't determine their purpose." "They're sensory organs," Han Sun explained. "The Scourge don't just see, they feel electromagnetic fields. That's how they target your shield generators so accurately." He tapped at the controls rapidly. "If we create a massive electromagnetic pulse, that would disable our own systems too," Neverin pointed out. Han Sun smiled slightly. "Not if we shield our critical systems first. On Earth, we've been dealing with EMP threats for centuries." At the main entry points, Colonel Lee and Choi Min organized the station's security forces into new formations. The council soldiers, used to standing in orderly lines, looked confused. "Spread out," Choi told them. "Small groups, multiple angles. Never stand where they expect you to be." "But our training," began the security chief. "Your training won't work against the Scourge," Lee interrupted. "They've already learned your patterns. You need to be unpredictable." He handed out modified weapons that Park Ji had prepared earlier. "These are set to a rotating frequency. The Scourge adapt to single-frequency weapons too quickly." A massive blast rocked the station. The lights went out for 3 seconds before emergency power kicked in. "West shields are down," someone shouted from a monitoring station. "They're coming in," called another voice. Lee's voice cut through the panic. "Everyone to positions. Remember what we practiced. Choi Min, take Team 2 to the secondary entrance. I'll hold here." The security forces looked at the humans in awe. While they trembled, these Deathworlders stood ready, almost eager. The first breach came exactly where Lee had predicted. Dark shapes poured through the damaged shield walls. The ground forces of the Void Scourge. They resembled black armor with glowing red lines, moving with mechanical precision. The Council security team fired in unison, but their shots seemed to be absorbed by the Scourge armor. The aliens began to back away in fear. "Hold positions," Lee shouted. He stepped forward and fired his modified weapon. The shot hit a Scourge soldier, and to everyone's surprise, punched straight through its chest. The creature fell, leaking a strange dark fluid. The security team stared in shock. Nothing had been able to kill a Scourge ground soldier so easily before. Han Sun identified their weakness. Lee explained quickly. "Their armor adapts to steady frequencies. Keep changing your aim points and firing patterns." The battle became intense. The Council soldiers followed Lee's example, adjusting their tactics. For the first time, they were causing damage to the Scourge forces. On the east side, the Scourge broke through as expected. They moved into the seemingly defenseless corridor, advancing confidently. Park Ji waited until they were surrounded by her hidden emitters. "Now," she called to the engineers at the control panel. The emitters activated, creating a crisscrossing network of energy beams that caught the Scourge in a deadly grid. Unable to adapt to attacks from so many angles at once, the Scourge soldiers faltered and fell. "Keep the pattern random," Park Ji ordered as she adjusted controls. "Don't let them predict the next sequence." In the command center, Han Sun worked frantically with the station's science team. "The pulse generator is ready," he announced. "But we'll only get one shot at this." Neverin looked worried. "Will it affect our people?" "No," Han Sun assured her. "But I need to time it perfectly to catch the maximum number of Scourge ships." He watched the tactical display, tracking the movement of the enemy vessels. They had formed a new attack pattern, concentrating on the command center itself. "They're learning," he murmured. "Adapting." His fingers hovered over the activation control. The Scourge ships moved closer, closer. Now, Han Sun pressed the button. A wave of invisible energy burst from the station. On the displays, they watched as Scourge ships suddenly lost control. Some crashed into each other. Others drifted aimlessly. Their red energy lines flickered and dimmed. "It worked," Neverin gasped. "By the stars, it worked." The battle raged for another hour, but the tide had turned. With their ships disabled and their ground forces facing unexpected resistance, the Void Scourge began to retreat. In the main corridor, Lee and the security team fought off the last invaders. A Scourge soldier lunged at one of the alien guards, its blade-like arm raised to strike. Lee threw himself between them, taking the hit on his shoulder. The alien watched in horror as red human blood splattered the wall. But Lee didn't fall. Instead, he grabbed the Scourge soldier and physically threw it back, then shot it through its core. "Are you alive?" the guard asked in disbelief, staring at Lee's bleeding wound. Lee grimaced but nodded. "It'll take more than that to kill a human." When the battle was finally over, the outpost was damaged but standing. The Council forces had suffered losses, but the civilians were safe, and for the first time since the Void Scourge appeared, they had won a clear victory. In the command center, Neverin approached the human team. All four were injured in some way. Park Ji had burns along her arms. Han Sun's forehead was cut. Choi Min limped from a leg wound. Lee's shoulder was bandaged, the red of blood seeping through. "You're all hurt," Neverin said. "Our medical team." "We'll be fine," Lee assured her. "Humans heal quickly." Neverin's expression was a mixture of awe and fear. "I've never seen anyone fight like you did. You ran toward danger instead of away from it." "That's what humans do," Park Ji said simply. Neverin hesitated, then asked the question that was on everyone's mind. "Will you help us fight the rest of this war?" The four humans looked at each other. Then Lee nodded. "We'll help," he said. "And we'll bring more humans." The Void Scourge attacked peaceful beings who couldn't defend themselves. His eyes hardened. "On Earth, we have a word for that. Bullying. We don't like bullies." As the human team returned to their transport to report back to the Council, the station staff watched them go with new eyes. These Deathworlders were indeed dangerous, but perhaps they realized that was exactly what the galaxy needed. 6 months had passed since the battle at Outpost Zeta 9. The news of the human victory had spread across Council space like wildfire. Worlds that once feared the mention of Deathworlders now spoke the word human with hope. In the Grand Council chamber, Ambassador Kim Jun stood before the assembled alien leaders. The room was much fuller than during his first visit. Representatives from dozens of worlds had come to hear him speak. "The tide is turning," Kim said, his voice calm but confident. "In the past 6 months, humans have helped defend 23 major attacks. The Void Scourge has been pushed back from all core worlds." Elder Tivlar nodded in agreement. "The reports from the front lines are encouraging. Your people have taught our forces new ways to fight, and new ways to think," added Neverin, who had been promoted after the successful defense of her outpost. "The Scourge can no longer predict our movements." Kim displayed a star map showing the changed battle lines. Large areas once marked in red were now blue, indicating reclaimed territory. "We have established 7 joint defense bases," Kim continued. 5,000 human soldiers now serve alongside Council forces. Our engineers have upgraded your weapons. Our scientists have improved your shields." The Council members murmured in approval, But Kim noticed not all faces showed happiness. Counselor Drelvac sat with her scaled arms crossed, her yellow eyes narrowed with suspicion. "And what does Earth ask in return for this? Generous help?" Drelvac asked pointedly. Kim turned to face her directly. "The same as before, Counselor. Fair trade agreements, knowledge exchange, and when this war ends, a place in the galactic community." "When the war ends," Drelvac repeated, "and if you decide not to leave afterward, your kind evolved as conquerors." The chamber grew quiet. Despite months of cooperation, the old fears still lingered. Kim was about to respond when an urgent message flashed on the main screen. All eyes turned to see Colonel Lee's face, his expression grim. "Ambassador, council members," Lee began, "the manufacturing hub at Helios Station is under heavy attack. They've sent out a distress call. I'm taking all available forces to assist, but we'll need reinforcements." Helios Station was the largest manufacturing center in Council space. If it fell, the war effort would suffer a critical blow. "We will send everything we can spare," Tidlar promised. As the transmission ended, Kim turned back to Drelvac. "Counselor, you asked what humans want. Right now, we want to save your people. Judge us by our actions, not your fears." The battle at Helios Station would become the turning point of the war. The Void Scourge had committed their largest force yet, over 300 ships and thousands of ground troops. They seemed determined to destroy the station at any cost. Colonel Lee's command ship arrived with the first wave of defenders. Through the viewports, he could see the massive space station surrounded by Scourge vessels. Parts of the outer ring were already in flames. "Status report," he demanded. 15,000 civilians still inside, reported Choi Min, who now coordinated all tactical operations. Evacuation is only 20% complete. Station shields failing in multiple sectors. Added Park Ji, studying the engineering readouts. Her left arm was in a metal brace, a reminder of a previous battle. "They're targeting the main power cores." Lee made his decision quickly. "We split into 3 teams. Choi, take our ships and engage their fleet. Draw them away from the evacuation routes. Han-sun, coordinate with the station's science team. I want everything you can tell me about this attack force." "And you?" asked Park Ji. "You and I are going inside," Lee said, his face determined. "We need to hold the station until the civilians are safe." Inside Helios Station, chaos reigned. Fires burned in many corridors. Emergency alarms blared. Civilians of a dozen different species rushed toward the evacuation ships, their faces showing pure terror. Lee and Park Ji, along with a team of human soldiers, moved against the flow, heading deeper into the station. They found the defense coordinator, a blue-skinned alien named Mako, trying desperately to organize the remaining security forces. Colonel Lee. Mako's relief was obvious. The Scourge breached the lower levels 10 minutes ago. They're moving toward the central hub where most civilians are gathered. "How many defenders do you have left?" Lee asked. 50 station guards. Maybe 20 who can actually fight." Mako's hands trembled. "My people are manufacturers, not warriors." Lee nodded. Park Ji strengthened the defenses around the evacuation points. "I'll take our team to the central hub." As Park Ji headed off with half their forces, Lee led the rest toward where the civilians were gathered. They hadn't gone far when they encountered the first wave of Scourge ground troops. Black armored figures moving with deadly purpose. The battle was immediate and brutal. The human soldiers used the tactics they had developed over months of fighting the Scourge. Constant movement, unpredictable attacks, targeting the weak points Han-sun had identified. But there were so many enemies. Lee's communicator crackled with Park Ji's voice. "Colonel, I've reached the evacuation zone. The Scourge are trying to cut it off from 3 directions. Hold them as long as you can," Lee ordered. "How much longer for full evacuation?" "At least 40 minutes, Park Ji replied, the sound of weapons fire in the background. Lee looked at the advancing Scourge forces, We might not have 40 minutes. In orbit around the station, Choi Min led the human and council ships in a desperate battle. The space around Helios was filled with weapons fire and exploding vessels. Formation Delta, Choi ordered. Target their lead ships. The human pilots responded instantly, their ships moving in tight, coordinated patterns that the Scourge couldn't predict. The council pilots tried to follow, but their movements were slower, less precise. "They're breaking through Sector 7, reported a council captain. "We can't hold them." "Yes, you can," Choi said firmly. "Remember your training. Don't think like prey. Think like a predator." The words had an effect. The council ships regrouped, adopted the human tactics, and pushed back. On his command screen, Choi watched the evacuation ships escaping from the station, each one filled with hundreds of civilians. Every ship that got away was a victory. In the station's research center, Han Sun worked frantically with the alien scientists. They had been analyzing Scourge communication patterns for months, trying to understand how the enemy coordinated their attacks. "There's something different about this attack," Han Sun said, studying the data streams. "The communication signals are stronger, more centralized." An alien scientist pointed to a specific reading. "This energy signature is new. It's coming from the largest ship in their fleet." Han Sun's eyes widened as he realized what they were seeing. "It's a command ship. That's why there are so many of them here. This is no ordinary attack." He hit his communicator. "Colonel Lee, we've identified a command vessel. It's coordinating the entire attack." Lee's voice came back, strained and interrupted by weapon fire. "Can we target it?" "It's heavily defended," Han Sun reported. "But if we could disable it, the entire Scourge force might lose cohesion." "Send the coordinates to Choi," Lee ordered. "We need that ship taken out." In the central hub, Lee and his team had established a defensive line in front of thousands of terrified civilians. The Scourge forces pressed forward relentlessly, their numbers seemingly endless. "Ammunition status." Lee called to his second-in-command. "Running low, sir. Maybe 10 more minutes at this rate." Lee grimaced. The evacuation would take longer than that. He made a quick decision. Fall back to position 2. Create a smaller perimeter. As they pulled back to the new position, Lee's communicator activated again. "Colonel." It was Park Ji, her voice urgent. "The Scourge have broken through to evacuation point 3. They're attacking the civilian ships." Lee's blood ran cold. How many civilians still there? "At least 2,000, mostly children and elderly," Park Ji replied. "I don't have enough people to hold them off." Without hesitation, Lee turned to his team. "Hold this position. I'm going to help Park Ji." Alone. His second-in-command looked shocked. "Sir, that's at least 5 sectors away." "Then I'd better run fast," Lee said, checking his weapon. "The civilians come first, always." Lee fought his way through the station, encountering Scourge soldiers at every turn. His uniform was torn, his face streaked with blood and soot. By the time he reached evacuation point 3, he was limping from a wound in his leg. What he found was a nightmare. Park Ji and a handful of defenders were making a last stand in front of a crowd of civilians. The youngest aliens were crying in fear. The Scourge were pressing in from all sides. "Get inside," Lee shouted to the civilians, pointing to the last evacuation ship. "Everyone on board now." He joined Park Ji at the barricade. "Status." "Not good," she admitted. "We're surrounded. The ship needs 3 more minutes to prep for launch." Lee nodded. "Then we give them 3 minutes." The Scourge attacked in force. Lee and Park Ji fought side by side, protecting the ship's loading ramp as the last civilians hurried aboard. Their weapons ran hot in their hands. Both humans were bleeding from multiple wounds, but neither stopped fighting. "Ship is ready," called the pilot from the ramp. "Final boarding." "Go," Lee shouted to Park Ji. "Get them out of here." Park Ji hesitated. "What about you?" "I'll hold them off," Lee said. Make sure the ship launches. That's suicide, Park Ji argued. A Scourge soldier lunged at them. Lee shot it down, then turned back to Park Ji. That's an order, engineer. Those civilians don't get left behind. Park Ji looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. She backed toward the ship, still firing. Lee turned to face the Scourge alone. He set his weapon to overload, a last resort that would create a massive explosion. But before he could make his final stand, a group of civilian aliens rushed from the ship. They grabbed Lee and dragged him backward, despite his protests. "No one gets left behind," said one of them, using Lee's own words. "Not even humans." The ship's doors closed just as the Scourge reached the ramp. The engines fired, and they lifted off, leaving the attackers behind. In orbit, Choi Min had received Han Sun's information about the command ship. He gathered all available fighters for one desperate assault. "This is our only chance," he told the mixed human and alien pilots. "Hit that ship with everything you have." The combined fleet punched through the Scourge defenses, taking heavy losses, but pressing forward with determination. When they finally reached the command ship, they unleashed a barrage that lit up space like a new star. The Scourge command ship exploded in a burst of red energy. Almost immediately, the rest of the Scourge fleet seemed to falter. Their perfect coordination dissolved into chaos. "It worked," shouted a council captain. "They're disorganized." Choi allowed himself a small smile. "Press the advantage. Don't give them time to recover." When the battle finally ended, Hylia Station was badly damaged, but still standing. Over 90% of the civilians had been evacuated safely. The Scourge had lost their largest force yet, including their command ship. In the station's medical center, Park Ji sat beside Lee's bed. The colonel was heavily bandaged but conscious. "The civilians?" he asked weakly. "All safe," Park Ji assured him. "You nearly got yourself killed, you know." Lee managed a small smile. "Worth it." Across the room, an alien child approached cautiously. It was one of the youngsters Lee had helped evacuate. The child placed a small handmade token on Lee's bedside table, then quickly scurried away. Park Ji picked it up. It was a crude figure of a human, made from twisted metal scraps. Written on it in council standard was a single word: hero. "Looks like you've made an impression," Park Ji said, showing it to Lee. Lee looked at the small token for a long moment. "This is why we fight," he said quietly. "Not for glory, not for conquest, but for them." As news of the victory at Hylia Station spread across council space, something changed in how the aliens viewed their human allies. The Deathworlders were still feared for their strength and ferocity, but now they were also honored for their courage and sacrifice. The tide of war had turned, and with it, the future of human-alien relations had forever changed as well. The victory at Hylia Station changed everything. For the first time since the war began, the Void Scourge was in retreat across all fronts. But Colonel Lee Hyun knew better than to celebrate too soon. In the quiet meeting room aboard the council flagship, he studied the star maps with a careful eye. "They're falling back to this region," Lee said, pointing to a distant sector near the edge of charted space. "All their remaining forces are gathering here." Elder Tivlar leaned forward, his 4 eyes blinking in thought. "Why there?" "There are no valuable targets in that sector." Han Sun, who had spent months analyzing Scourge behavior patterns, moved to Lee's side. "I believe I know why." He tapped a series of commands, and the display zoomed in on a small, unremarkable star system. "Our deep space scans detected unusual energy readings from this area. Based on everything we've learned about the Scourge, I think this is their central command hub." The room fell silent as everyone understood what this meant. After a year of brutal fighting, they had found the heart of the enemy. "If we could strike there," Park Ji began, her voice thoughtful. She had recovered from her injuries, though she still bore scars from the battle at Helios. "We could end this war," Lee finished for her, one decisive blow. Choi Min, who had become the Joint Fleet's tactical commander, shook his head. The defenses would be unlike anything we faced. They'll have their entire remaining force protecting it. Then we need a plan, Lee said simply. Something they won't expect. 3 days later, the Council's High Command gathered to hear Colonel Lee's proposal. Ambassador Kim Jun stood beside him, his diplomatic presence a reminder of the alliance between humans and the Council races. A direct assault would fail, Lee began bluntly. Even with our combined forces, we would lose too many ships before reaching the target. Councillor Drelvac, who had remained skeptical of humans despite their victories, crossed her arms. Then what do you suggest, Colonel? A surrender? Lee's face remained calm. I suggest a small strike team. One ship, moving fast and quiet, while the main fleet creates a distraction elsewhere. Murmurs filled the room. It seemed impossible. What would this strike team do once they reached the command hub? Asked Tivlar. Based on Han Sun's analysis, we believe the Void Scourge operates on a centralized control system. Lee explained. If we could infiltrate their command center and disrupt it, the entire Scourge might collapse. Drelvac's scales flared with disbelief. And who would volunteer for such a suicide mission? Lee stood straighter. I would, along with my core team. Ambassador Kim looked surprised. This wasn't part of their discussion. Colonel, the chances of survival are low, Lee acknowledged, but the chances of victory are worth the risk. Silence fell across the room. These aliens, who had evolved on peaceful worlds, could not understand the human willingness to face almost certain death. Elder Tivlard finally spoke. The Council cannot order you to do this. You don't need to, Lee replied. Where I come from, we have a saying. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. This war must end, and we can end it. After much debate, the plan was approved. The human strike team would make their attempt while the combined fleet engaged the Scourge's main forces as a distraction. As the meeting ended, Ambassador Kim pulled Lee aside. You didn't tell me you were planning this. Lee's expression was resolute. Would you have approved? No, Kim admitted. But I understand why you must try. He placed a hand on Lee's shoulder. Remember what's at stake here. Not just victory, but the future relationship between humans and the Council races. Lee nodded. History is watching us. We won't let Earth down. The human strike ship was small and fast, designed for stealth rather than combat. As they approached the Scourge command hub, they could see the massive battle unfolding light years away. The Council and human fleets engaging the enemy in a tremendous diversion. Inside the ship, Lee and his team made final preparations. Park Ji checked their specialized equipment one last time. Han Sun reviewed the intel they had gathered about the command hub's layout. Choi Min loaded extra weapons, his movements precise and efficient. Once we're inside, Lee told them, we'll have maybe 30 minutes before they realize the main battle is just a distraction. We need to reach the central control room in that time. The others nodded. They had fought together for a year now. Words weren't necessary. Their ship slipped past the outer defenses, using technology Park Ji had developed to mask their energy signature. They docked at an unused maintenance port on the giant Scourge structure and cut their way inside. The interior of the command hub was unlike anything they had seen before. The corridors pulsed with the same red energy lines that marked all Scourge vessels, but here they were brighter, more alive. This way, Han Sun whispered, following the readings on his scanner. The control signals are strongest from that direction. They moved silently through the structure, avoiding Scourge patrols when possible, eliminating them quickly when necessary. 20 minutes into their mission, they reached a massive door blocking their path. This is it, Han Sun confirmed. The central control chamber is beyond this point. Park Jai examined the door's locking mechanism. I can bypass this, but it will trigger alarms. How long will it take? Lee asked. 3 minutes, she estimated. Lee nodded. Do it. Choi Min and I will handle whatever comes. As Park Ji worked on the door, the first alarm sounded. but not because of them. Han Sun checked his communicator. The Scourge fleet is breaking off from the main battle, he reported. They've discovered the diversion. Li's face remained determined. Then we need to move faster. The doors slid open, revealing a vast chamber beyond. In the center stood a glowing pillar of red energy, pulsing like a heartbeat. Around it moved figures unlike the Scourge soldiers they had fought. These were larger, their black armor more elaborate. Guards, whispered Choi Min. Protecting something important. Li assessed the situation quickly. Han Sun, you're our expert. Get to that central pillar and figure out how to shut it down. The rest of us will keep them busy. Without waiting for a response, Li stepped into the chamber and fired at the nearest guard. The battle erupted immediately. The Scourge guards moved with greater speed and intelligence than the soldiers they had faced before. Choi Min fought at Li's side, his movements a blur as he engaged two guards at once. Park Ji provided covering fire, her modified weapon causing significant damage to their armor. Han Sun slipped around the edge of the battle, making his way toward the central pillar. When he reached it, he connected his analysis device to an access point and began working frantically. "Colonel," he called out, "this isn't just a control system. It's the source of the Scourge itself." Li ducked under a guard's attack, firing back as he moved. "Explain." "The Scourge aren't alive in the way we understand it," Han Sun said, his fingers flying over his device. "They're automated weapons, created long ago for a war that ended centuries before our time. This pillar contains their core programming." A guard broke through their defensive line, heading straight for Han Sun. Choi Min intercepted it, throwing himself into its path. The guard's blade-like arm pierced through Choi's chest, but he still managed to fire his weapon point-blank into the guard's core. Both fell to the ground. Choi Min looked up at Li, blood on his lips. "Finish it," he whispered. Then his eyes closed. Li roared with anger and renewed determination. "Park Ji, give Han Sun cover. We're ending this now." The battle intensified. Li fought like a man possessed, his movements driven by a combination of skill and raw human emotion. For each guard he fell, another seemed to appear. At the central pillar, Han Sun worked desperately. "I think I can shut it down," he called. "But the system is fighting back. I need more time." "We don't have more time," Park Ji shouted, firing continuously to keep the guards away from Han Sun. "The Scourge fleet will be here any minute." Li made a decision. "Han Sun, what if we overloaded it instead of shutting it down?" Han Sun looked up, understanding immediately. That would work, but the energy release would destroy this entire structure. We wouldn't survive. "But would it stop the Scourge?" Li pressed. Han Sun nodded. "Completely. Without this core, they would all shut down." Li turned to Park Ji. Their eyes met, and an unspoken understanding passed between them. They had come too far to fail now. "Do it," Li ordered. Han Sun began the overload sequence. The red energy in the pillar pulsed faster, growing brighter. The chamber trembled as power surged through the structure. "We have 2 minutes before critical overload," Han Sun reported. Li touched his communicator. "Ambassador Kim, can you hear me?" After a moment of static, Kim's voice came through. "Colonel, the Scourge fleet suddenly changed course." "What's happening?" "We found their control center," Li explained calmly. "We're overloading it. All Scourge units should shut down permanently when it blows." There was a pause. "And your team?" Li looked at Park Ji and Han Sun. "We won't be coming back, Ambassador. The blast radius is too large." "No," Kim's voice was strained. "There must be another way." "There isn't time," Li said. "But this is our choice. Tell Earth we did our duty. And tell the Council. Tell them humans keep their promises." As Li ended the transmission, a new alarm blared through the chamber. More guards were coming. "1 minute," Han Sun said, his voice steady despite everything. Park Ji moved to Li's side. It was an honor, Colonel. Lee nodded. The honor was mine. The three humans stood together as the chamber shook around them. The red energy in the pillar had become blindingly bright. The remaining guards seemed confused, their movements becoming erratic as their control system began to fail. 10 seconds, Han Sun counted. Lee thought of Earth, so far away. He thought of the countless alien lives they had saved. He thought of Choi Min, who had already given everything for this mission. "This is why we came," he said softly. "This is what humans do." The pillar erupted in a cascade of energy. The last thing Lee saw was a wave of brilliant light engulfing everything. 1 month later, Ambassador Kim Jun stood before the full Galactic Council. Every member world was represented, the chamber more crowded than it had ever been. "The war is over," Kim said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "The Void Scourge has been defeated. Not a single unit remains active anywhere in Council space." Elder Tivlar rose from his seat, "And we know the price that was paid for this victory. Colonel Lee Hyun, Engineer Park Ji, Scientist Han Sun, and Tactical Officer Choi Min gave their lives to save us all." The chamber was silent for a moment. Then, one by one, the council members stood. In the tradition of their various species, they offered gestures of respect and honor. Councillor Drelvac, who had once been the most vocal critic of human involvement, stepped forward. "I asked what humans wanted in return for their help," she said, her voice uncharacteristically humble. "Now I know. They wanted to protect those who could not protect themselves, even at the cost of their own lives." Ambassador Kim nodded. "That is the essence of humanity at its best." Elder Tivlar raised his 4 hands for attention. "The Council has reached a unanimous decision. The quarantine of Earth is permanently lifted. Humans are hereby invited to join the Galactic Council as full members, with all rights and privileges." The chamber erupted in approval. Species that had once feared humans now celebrated them as saviors and allies. Kim accepted the formal invitation with a bow. "On behalf of Earth, I thank you. We look forward to a future of peace and cooperation." As the ceremony continued, Kim looked out at the vast gathering of alien species. He thought of Lee and his team, who had made this moment possible. Their sacrifice had forever changed how the galaxy viewed humans. In the Grand Archive of the Galactic Council, a new monument was unveiled that day. It depicted 4 human figures standing tall and proud. Beneath it, inscribed in every language of the Council races, were these words: "Deathworlders answered the galaxy's cry for help, and history was made." For centuries to come, young aliens would learn the story of the humans who came from a harsh world, yet showed the greatest compassion. They would learn that strength without mercy is meaningless, and that true courage means standing for those who cannot stand for themselves.